Hi, Maddie. This is Professor Evans with feedback on your SA2, the rhetorical analysis. So, as always, let's start with what we were looking for in this essay. An effective introduction that would engage an audience, a clear thesis that would work as a roadmap as to where you're going in your argument. Kind of a good structure to where you're going, kind of order of operations. What should you talk about first? What should you talk about second? A fairly limited scope, maybe only one or two rhetoric elements that you explore in depth as opposed to many that you're doing in a surface fashion, and not getting trapped into the meaning of the essay or the purpose of the writer. In other words, don't get trapped in torture, but rather continue to look at the effectiveness of his argument. So I'm definitely, and I was slightly confused by your paper right here in terms of what your thesis says and then what you do in the body of the paper. Well, while we're here, I would end up thinking also, remember that always having a much more kind of, how shall we say, directive title with for all your essays. Although this does tell me it's essay 2 and the title of it is Defense of Torture. If I handed this to somebody else, would they know what that meant? So you could even do, the morality of torture, in defense of Sam Harris's, a rhetorical analysis of Sam Harris's In Defense of Torture. Not the most sophisticated title in the world, but it kind of clearly sets up the reader for what we're going into as well. You don't do much of anything as a way of kind of introducing this to us. It's a cold dive, boom. Sam Harris argues in a blog, if we're going to do this. So we've got this summary introduction right here, and not much of a way of kind of bringing us into this topic. So I would think about, and remember your topic is rhetoric, so maybe your introduction has to do with something about that right there. Interestingly enough, your thesis says he makes a valid argument. I see. I think I got it now. I think I missed this right here. Makes a valid argument. And I don't know if you need this one that you agree with. When we were saying that one of the criteria for good rhetorical analysis is that it remains neutral. So kind of you showing that you don't particularly agree with it. If it's a crappy argument, that'll be enough to kind of shoot it down. But his lack of ethos, his logos and overuse of hypothetical situations, makes it unpersuasive. So which I was happy about that you went that route right there. I like the fact that you were thinking about taking this as a negative stance. I think that's an interesting way to go about it as well. I think your ethos section needs a little bit of work. We'll figure, yes, I agree with your point that he could have more authority, that he could end up being some kind of expertise or something like this in the field as well. But I think the perspective that we're working at it is that he is a journalist and that he is kind of arguing a case. So whether or not he is an expert in the field, he does end up allowing the same way to be able to make a case for this. So I do think that there are places where he is using ethos in a very interesting fashion. I would point you towards page 1, the last paragraph, where he talks about, I hope my case for torture is wrong, and I would be much happier standing side by side with all the good people who oppose torture categorically. I would be sincerely grateful to have my mind changed on the subject. So he's setting himself in terms of his ethos there as being, he wants to be proven wrong. He wants to be this, but he's afraid that there's not going to be a case. So I think there's definitely places where you could work with that as well, but I'm not sure just because of kind of the fact that it's a blog or, even just mentioning the New York Times, I don't know if that's necessarily qualifies for ethos. And similarly here, so this you're saying that in terms of it, it will only achieved when he references real life right here. I get the impression you're saying is like he's not doing a good job. Here's one place, and then you give us literally 2 sentences to kind of say that this lacks logos as well. I think that if you are going to make that case, you need to make a much stronger case that how it does. I'd suggest looking at logos in the big picture of the article as well. So how does he use it throughout the entire article, possibly in a problematic fashion? These using these overly kind of pathos-driven hypothetical situations. I think there is something that is problematic about those. A lot of times I refer to this as kind of low-hanging fruit. He's taking the easiest route to kind of appeal to people's emotions, so that you might want to kind of play with that as well. That somehow or another, when you're talking about Nazis and killing, Gandhi and things like this, is that these seem to be not necessarily just kind of like outlandishly hypothetical, but rather they seem to be kind of like, just easy targets. Is that I suspect that a much more nuanced argument could have much more sophisticated hypothetical situations that they could bring up as well, as opposed to just going for the gut punch. Finally, also, for the rest of your academic write, never write in conclusion. Think about it this way, that literally kind of visually, if I'm looking at it, I assume that if I see the last paragraph, I know that you're concluding. So you don't need to do that as well. It just ends up being kind of extra verbiage that's unnecessary. You'll see a lot of people kind of doing it in academic writing, but I would recommend not doing so. All right, I hope this was helpful.